You could see too. It's not just for Alan. You could all see. It's a picture of Baba's face coming out from the hollow of this tree that I took in Jane Hayes' home in 1991, and you could see Baba's face in the hollow of the tree where Monty had her dream vision of Mayra and Mother Mary. Remember, if you were, do you remember that one? The dream that she had where the face interchanged,
Yeah.
it was Mary and Mayra? Okay.
But we cannot
Would
see
you
it
like
quite
to
far.
Here.
She was so funny, Helen.
What is the book? How Tony.
Tony.
But I'd share that with you because we were doing
Don't
the
take my
Remembering
photo, I'll
Monty.
kill you.
I'm sharing for Monty.
Sorry.
No.
Just gonna put this behind you.
That'll do it.
Do you want?
Please.
It's nice to enjoy anyone's company. It
Yes.
really is. So just enjoy our
Yes.
barber and everybody. So,
She's taping?
You're the good boy.
Thank you.
No, but it came from
I bet she would. She's talented enough to do that, right?
I have
I'm gonna
to.
zoom in on your face.
She could exit me.
I
You
want
can
to
block me. Just block me out.
You let me
Baba won't mind.
Yeah, I want to
Have you
show
seen,
Darren.
do you know, I'm not sure.
That's not good enough on
I'm trying to see if I remember.
All right, speak.
Testing 1,
Yeah.
2, 3.
This
Where's
is
the
This is our
microphone?
dog, Bobby.
We're just gonna use the camera mic. This is informality personified.
Where is George?
This is for the
It's-
debug.
it's-
George.
Isn't that a great job? We miss him.
Otherwise they would never ask.
Definitely miss him.
I miss George.
Wow.
Picture of our dog.
Oh,
The Keyshawn.
you're
George.
fluffy. You're
Your
fluffy.
backyard.
Oh yeah, that's the picture I took.
Oh, my God.
Where's Fluffy?
This is the Baba's face.
Where's Fluffy? Poochie Fluffy.
Baba.
Let me see.
Really? On
He
the
went-
tree.
He passed away kind of, he got real sick.
George, where is George? I miss George.
You got kids.
You was so nice last evening, so
We're
I
sort of
miss
ready
you
for
already.
another dog.
Oh,
I had cats, I
You
know.
don't
I'm
hear.
not getting another
The
one.
problem is.
We
he's-
registered with the Keyshawn Rescue Group to get another.
Yeah.
I think it's
We've
a
seen
lot better
of
without the
wonderful
table.
dogs, but it's hard to explain that we had a dog that was human.
Not gonna,
I mean, he really was human.
it's not hard to explain.
Actually,
Anybody who
it
has
is
a dog
going to
knows
be
that.
human
Oh, is
if
that
we
so?
had Bob.
I have a dog, my dog is human.
No? It's not. What kind of dog is it?
It's a Tibetan Terrier. Benji,
You're totally sentient.
totally cute.
Where is money? Money.
Money!
I mean,
Don't worry about where everybody
you know,
else
each
is.
person in the
What's your
family.
dog's name?
Money.
Ruby kind.
She'll come, she'll come.
She will fill out the
She'll come and
She's a
check
word
it
in a
out.
flash.
There's a lot of nicknames.
She
came out, she said
It was the-
Mine, that I'm looking
It
for.
was the flash, the camera.
Oh, that's
Good, I'm gonna make them
What are you
some
going?
water.
What are you going?
I'll get water for you. You sit down.
What are you going?
That's
What are
my
you
job.
going?
That's my job.
I have water here, please.
What the-
Oh, you're sitting on a garlanded seat.
Yes.
How
Oh,
nice.
that's
So
so
sweet.
Ah.
You know how in movies you have the name of the actor that they have just the garlanded seats.
That's
So
funny.
sweet. That's nice.
Yeah.
That's nice. It's nice to have you back, Angela. I missed
I'm
you.
back, I'm back.
It's been a long time.
It's been a long time.
One of these.
I was just
It's
gone a
another
week.
one. Oh, you comfy? Okay. You comfy? I ran you around the city. I haven't visited from
If you like to
DC.
sit on the
So-
Oh,
floor.
that's good.
I run her around
you.
the most
I can't
part
be
of
stupid
Manhattan,
because I do
give
not
lots,
like
and
to
give
sit
lots
on
of
the
way,
floor.
keep it.
Have
I don't
to
do
sit
well.
on the
She's
floor.
been nice to me.
Or you have no
She has to,
room.
she has to journey back.
Or you want to be
But
me
I
and
must
my
be
father.
and she has to travel back to DC. And she's
Yeah, yeah, no flash.
She's not shunning me. She's
It's like daylight all over again.
Really
That's the ideal lighting.
It's a lesson to.
Ellen, you prepare
If
your
it's going to be a
speech.
couple of hours,
Absolutely.
you should start.
We rehearsed for hours.
The flower.
Carry on then.
Yeah,
Because it
from the
takes-
morning.
you know how
We got 2 hours.
It
Carry on.
It takes 15 minutes for them
To warm up.
no, and also 15 minutes to get out.
Yeah.
To go to the airport.
Hey, Angela, where'd you get that little samadhi up there?
Adorable.
Oh, yeah, we got it from
From
Love Street.
Street.
We got it
Street
blank.
lamppost.
All right,
And
let's
Darren
do
painted it.
logistics first.
Logistics first.
When does Robert have to leave?
4:30.
4:30.
All right.
And that means we have
So
to end
we
the
have
talk
to-
at 4:15.
All right,
Which is
we'll
2
have
hours.
his
So-
little lunch ready for him.
Lunch.
It's a little dinner.
Allah, you're in charge. He's not gonna get any food on the plane.
Oh, he's flying.
No.
Hello.
We need a
You
sandwich.
just- you need-
We'll make a sandwich of all the chicken that we...
There's a lot of chicken.
Well, maybe he
We'll
can grab
definitely
his
make
own
a
little
sandwich.
snack.
Chicken sandwich, okay?
Don't worry about it.
There's a lot of
We
chicken.
have the willingness.
How long does
We
it
have
take
tons
Yeah.
of
to
chicken.
grab
It
food?
is some spread special.
Forget
Please
it.
don't
No,
grab
no,
it.
let's plan.
All right,
Let's
then
plan.
then
Alan's the team
4:25.
leader.
Packed lunch, off we go.
He's the captain.
Pack lunch at 4:20, just to give.
Hi.
Give him 5 minutes
Am I
to throw
driving?
something
Lunch
together.
No,
Put his bag together.
the pattern.
Where's he going? To the airport?
So you're leaving from
And then
JFK?
Ira Goodman
Yeah.
just offered to
Because
take.
JetBlue leaves only from JFK.
And that's where I'm.
Ira,
Yes.
you're gonna take
I
Ellen
took
to the
them
airport?
To Penn.
Okay,
I took them.
if you,
Oh, to Penn Station.
Great
Okay.
flight.
Because I can easily do that as well.
Very nice.
all right,
Very
you want to,
nice.
But are you driving through the city?
no, I'm not. Normally I go by Captain Z,
Okay,
but I just offered that.
all right. So, I mean, he'll have his ride
Yeah,
around the same time.
you can take your pick.
Yeah.
All right.
We started a conversation this morning, maybe we could finish it in the car.
You can never tell. Let's see. It is wonderful to be together with this intimate and legendary Sunday group. True secrets of Baba's manifestation are discussed. Archived but never published.
No, wait a minute, that's Myrtle Beach. Oh, no backbiting, okay.
For the record, George.
But not published until the actors are deceased.
Yeah.
Posthumously?
Most of them. Now, today, because it has been probably 25 years since Robert has presented in New York City,
Wow.
and except for about a year, 8 months, about a year ago in Myrtle Beach, for me, it's probably been 20 years since I've heard Robert present. We want to make sure that the New Yorker mines every little tidbit that we can. from
Here.
Here today.
There.
And but we thought that we would be very bold and leave it to Baba to select the themes. Now you have to participate because this is going to be a sharing and question and answer thing. I did want to mention a few things. I don't know how many of you know that for a year and a half, 2 years, Adi? When you traveled with him as his attendant?
Yeah.
With Audie?
With Adi, and in fact was with Adi when he dropped the body.
Wow.
Robert carries a lot of Mandalay stories that few of us have heard, but can only be stimulated to remember them
Thank you.
by
Cattle prod.
cattle prod.
Whatever works.
And so this group gets to see if by questions we can come up with stuff that ordinarily neither of us would remember
Or be able to access.
or be able to access.
So we have to poke you, huh?
Yes.
Okay.
So the floor is open.
Poke away.
And George is, there's no problem with George.
What is the area of discussion that you're most resistant to getting into?
Oh.
Well, you wanted pokes, right?
Oh, yes.
I want to hear about Audie and how you hooked up with him.
Right.
Fortunately, I was able to spend 4 years as a resident in India, 79 to 83, when everybody was still alive. And got to spend a lot of time with Mandalay. So little special stories that emerged from those experiences that give either a hint of their unique characters or of ways in which they conducted what ostensibly was known as spiritual training. That was the rubric under which residents still are able to stay in India on long-term visas, is that they are there for, quote, spiritual training. And the Mandalay are the trainers. Who, of course, in turn, receive spiritual training from you-know-who. And from the boss, so they're passing it on.
Can I just interject a question, Robert? When we go to the website of visiting Meherabad, they say never put such a thing on your application for a visa if you're just going to visit.
Absolutely not.
But are you saying for an extended stay?
Sure, what's called an entry visa.
Yeah.
You go to live there.
When you go to live there, then that purpose is accepted.
Right. Otherwise, you put down you're going to tourism.
All right, thank you.
Pilgrimage.
No, they specifically tell you don't say pilgrimage.
Tourism.
Yeah.
It's easier.
Yeah.
Neutral. Incorporates everything.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
So how was the training conducted, like with chairs and?
Whips. It was ordinary circumstances, which were transformed. I can think of so many. But you wanted to ask us about Adi.
Yeah, how about it?
Adi was very dynamic. He loved to talk about Baba, he loved to travel. He was invited to open a lot of new centers in India, and he liked travel companions that stimulated him. So he invited me to go with him to Andhra Pradesh in southeast India to the opening of a Baba center in a place called Guntur. There were two other Westerners, Jack Small, the one and only, and a guy from LA named Steve Berry. And we were met in Hyderabad by the Andhrawala, who was the person who was making everything happen. While we were in Guntur, we stayed in a hotel that had actually been built on a site where Baba had given darshan. There was a bust of Baba in the lobby. And we were having a great time. I gave a lot of talks. Even the Westerners were invited to give talks. There was a lot of food, and it was hot. It was March, which is the beginning of summer months in India. So the reason why it's closed to pilgrims is it's too hot. And I remember that last night we took a tonga and had Chinese food, and Adi ate a lot of watermelon. Out of his mouth. And during the night, we were woken up that Adi was in distress and basically had a heart attack and died. And then I was given the task of, or took upon myself the task of calling Mandalay to let them know that this had happened. And I placed what was then known as a lightning call, which is the fastest telephone call that they could make in India. Still meant waiting about 3 hours for the connection to go through.
What year is this, Robert?
81, I think. 82?
It was 80, March of 80? March.
The Bob Street was there?
Yeah, he was in India, but he wasn't on the trip.
It was just you and Audie on the trip.
You and Steve Berry and Jackson. In March of 80. And so Bao answered the phone. I called the trust and I told him that Adi had died. Of course, everyone was really shocked. And he said, what are you going to do now? And he said, bring Adi's body to Meherabad. Guntur is about 1,000 miles from Nagar. So what we ended up doing after the doctor came and examined Adi and that he had gone and filled out the death certificate, was packed Adi's body in ice and sheets. And then in an Indian ambassador car, Steve, Jack, myself, Adi's body, the driver, and the very overweight Underwaller left to drive straight through to Mehrabad
$1,000.
on Indian roads.
Wow.
Picking up ice for one trip.
Wow.
It was 1,000 kilometers, so about 600 miles. And all we did was stop to pee and fill up the gas tank. And drove all through the night with Adi's body wedged in the back seat of the small car with all of us. It was quite a little adventure. And we drove straight to Mehrabad, and everyone was there. They put out they sent telegrams, made calls. A lot of people came from Bombay, Pune, everywhere. All the Mandali were there. But Hugh, you can join the talk. And I remember Pendu saying that Bob had made a mistake. They'd taken the wrong Adi Irani. Pendu's name was Adi R. Irani, and I was Adi K. Irani. By one letter, Bob had made a mistake. He should have taken it back. And of course, these people had known each other for 50, 60 years.
Yeah.
In very close proximity. It was a great shock. All the men were there, all the women. I remember Bob Street actually met us in the car with rescue remedy ready for all of us. And then...
What was the rescue remedy?
It's a liquid
flour.
flour
Flour.
remedy, right?
Okay.
What about arnica for trauma?
Yeah,
Oh,
well, that's part of
it
it.
is.
That's correct. And then his body was placed in the casket, and several of the men brought over to the grave that Padre had dug the graves many years before anybody started dying in preparation for the inevitable. So everything was all loose dirt for the men. And so his body was brought and garlanded and placed in the earth, and all the women were there, Mara was there, all the men, and lots of several hundred people showed up. Honor Adi, his great love for the Avatar. But Adi had not wanted to go. He even said on the trip, he said he was looking forward to these 10 more years. He had all kinds of plans. He was going to open another center in Jabalpur up in North India. He asked me to go with him. And he was very excited about all the things that were coming. And the one of them that wanted to stay alive and be active, Bob was snatched fast. And all the rest of them who were waiting who couldn't wait to die, to get their exit visas, as they say, are still lingering. So Bob has a sense of humor.
Wow.
Well, let's tell some Adi stories.
Yeah, definitely.
I'll start with two minor ones, and then I would go. Adi was one of my favorite models because he had a sparkling intellect and a great impish sense of humor. And he would always surprise you somehow. The first time I'd gone over to India, and this is probably in the 70s, and Adi said, are you willing to give a talk at the Ahmednagar Baba group? I said, sure. He said, they do not speak English. I said, well, that's a problem for me because my Marathi is really kind of marginal. He said, I don't translate for you. That's fine. So we got in the hall. It was near it seems to me it was on the grounds of the complex. Very close to the hall. Still there. About, I'd say, 70 or 80 bellboys. So, and I checked with Adi about what to talk about. We just talked about experiences in America, a little bit about the drug work, etc. So I start and I say, J-Buck, I'm Allan Cohen and I live in Washington, D.C. I look over to Avi and we go on for about 3 or 4 minutes. And I'd say something else, for 30 seconds, he'd go on for another 30 minutes. And I'm saying, gosh, it must be very complex to get the English meaning, translated. This went on the entire night. And so after about an hour and a half, I had talked about 15 minutes. And everybody seemed very pleased. And he says, Adi, I have to ask you something. I said, about Marathi, how is it that it takes so many words to translate? He says, he looked a little guilty. He says, well, I did have to embellish what you had said just a little bit.
Did you ask him what you said?
I was afraid to. And then I remember another great Adi story that showed me, that was very encouraging to me at the time, and about how it was, you had to work within your personality no matter what it was. We were in the Ahmednagar, the Trust Complex, and having an intense discussion about one of his favorite topics, conviction. Loved conviction. That was his specialization. It'll be known in history as the conviction model. And it was intense, and it was focused on Baba, and he's looking intently at me, and he's in the middle of this incredibly important spiritual point. And now I'm on it. And I see him going like this. He's looking off into the distance. I figure he's having a vision. While he's looking, and I look around, there's this very beautiful woman who's walking. And I turned back to Adi with kind of a look like, some things never change.
He was fond of saying you can change everything except human nature.
That's cute.
And he also gave me the Indian perspective on things that one would think about being miraculous. It was around that time also I was talking about some spiritual subject, and there was a big hustle and bustle, and voices were being raised in the yard. There was some kind of big hassle going on in the Monthly complex. And I said, what's going on? Oh, might have been somebody has seen a snake. I said, well, I was kind of interested, so you can go out and see. So I walk out into the courtyard. There's about 30 or 40 people hanging out around this tall, older, toothless guy who was gesturing and talking to the townspeople with a snake hanging around his neck. This is, I think what's going on. Yeah, that is just a snake wallah. Somebody called, there was a snake in the storage room coming out. And, I didn't know about snake wallas. And, I looked and then I saw the snake was alive. And I said, damn lucky that's not a poisonous snake he's dealing with there. And I said, what are you talking? This is the little snake that's up with the skaters. Huh? The crate snake. That crate snake. One bite, you're already dead in 30 seconds. Step back. So what's he doing? And Ani gave me a look like, you stupid Westerner. You've never seen a snake wallow before. So he said, whatever his name was, Rahman and Abdul, Westerner, show him how you work with the snake. So he said, okay. So the snake law takes the snake, looks at the snake, drops him, and the snake is wriggling around like that. Yeah! And he's whipping it around. Meanwhile, he's still talking to everybody else. How are you? And finally, he gets bored, picks up the snake, he looks at it. The snake goes like that. He puts it back around his neck. The necklace. I said, this is unbelievable, Adi. What is unbelievable, Adi? It's Johnny Carson show. I think this guy could go on the Johnny Carson show. And
Joe Pine.
Joe Pine, right. And so Adi explained, this was unusual, but this guy had he would always have one of the best phones in town. And he would get priority calls if there were snake problems. And then Padre later told me. I told him the story because Padre was not an engineer, he was a solid, down-to-earth guy. And I said, Padre, here's what I saw today. I want to check out the reality of it. Padre said, woof. And then Padre said, well, he's not bad snake ball, but his father, now there was a snake ball. And he told me these incredible stories about how the father had timed spells for the snakes. And all the snakes are collected and sent to Bombay for defanging and getting them sterilized. And he said that the father had like 30-second, 60-second, 1 minute spells on the snakes. And he would occasionally show it off by putting all the snakes who were paralyzed, waking them up, and then giving them these mantras. They would wake up exactly on time. Of course, as is the tradition, the snake balls must die of a snake bite. That's what I would say. So he would introduce we Westerners to very, very, he thought, wild and occult qualities of India. Robert stimulated memories.
I can think of a couple of odd anecdotes. He had certain sayings he was fond of, such as, better luck next birth. Without marriage, a man is incomplete. With marriage, he's finished. Don't marry, be happy. He got to a phase also. I ran into him one time at Maribad. He was coming down the hill as I was going up. And he said, "Sir, who are you? What are you? Why are you?"
Yes, yes.
I said, my response to him was, "Why not?" Good answer, Dreyfus.
Wow.
One time I was sitting in his office, and Padre came in, and they started shouting at each other, loudly, not in English. And I was just sitting there trying to disappear into the woodwork as these two giants in Baba's cars were just flailing each other verbally over something or other. And then Padre left the side of the door and I looked at me. He said, "Did that bother you?" I said, "Well, yes, Kaka." And Padre were really having a serious argument. He said, "No." He said, "Baba taught us long ago to express whatever is on our minds, get it off our chests, and let it go." He said, "Neither Padre nor I are carrying this at all. Don't you?"
Wow.
It was an interesting lesson.
The question is how to do it
Yes.
and not to hurt. Because
Yes.
Baba said with another hand, not to hurt people. If you express yourself, sometimes you do hurt. So how to do it? How to...
Good question.
Yeah, there was a passage that said something about telling someone the truth is supposed to be uplifting. You're supposed to be
Yes, yes.
uplifting.
Never hurt the heart of another.
Alan, you have answer?
Well,
Oh, yeah.
we're only human.
Well,
He
actually,
might have
well, most
answer.
of you remember Baba responding to this dilemma. In fact, Tony remembers. I think I heard Tony talk about it. And the best analogy was, the one that stuck out, what does a doctor do when his patient is in the hospital with dangerous high blood pressure? The doctor comes in and the patient says, Doctor, how am I doing today? How's my blood pressure? And there's the chart at the bottom of the bed. And the doctor can see on the chart, a little elevated today. Now he wants to be honest. But it turns out, if he tells the patient it's a little elevated, the patient gets very anxious, his blood pressure goes up. If he tells him, oh, it's much better today, the patient relaxes, the blood pressure goes down. And he said, in that case, of course, the doctor should tell him his blood pressure went down. So, I think Bob said, never use the truth as a weapon. As the truth is always relative anyway. Now, that also, it seems to contrast the notion of being honest. But as Lud Dimple once said, there's nothing that says you can't keep quiet when you think something. And that's not being dishonest. Being quiet is not being dishonest.
Yeah.
And what was that other clever example? Remember, Nomi, of the spiritual man who had vowed honesty. He was a Muslim and he was going to the mosque one day. And just as he was about to sit down for prayer, a man raced by him. It was through Bell. And soon after he sat down, the police came, or fundamentalists, who knows who at that time, and was looking for this man and said, was it Ali? Said,
Renowned for his honesty.
right, renowned for his honesty. Have you seen a man come by here recently? And Ali said, not since I've been sitting here. I've seen no man. Which turned out to be
Exactly the truth.
the truth. So, there's a delicate balance between being brutally honest and being tactful, so that it's not hurtful. Now, the contrast was, these are people who are trained not to personalize what people had said, and not to believe that anger was permanent, or they didn't hold on to it. Get it off your chest, goodbye, right? That's a rare talent. If you can be really yelled at and cool it after that, you're very well developed. Most people can't do that.
Yeah, I think it may be important to note that these people had a level of training that we have not had.
It's also part of our training now, I think, really speaking personally.
But didn't Baba say not to express anger? Did he say not to express anger?
He said you're not a stone.
Well, he said different things at different times to
I
different
remember
people.
even Bao's emails, it was something about how he would praise someone, and I did not get angry, and it was always, oh my God. I did not get angry. The most difficult situations, and he said, don't get angry. Baba doesn't want you to express that anger. I guess we have to control it.
I think that's it. I think the non-stone comment had to do with the fact that you could not have feelings, but that you could have control over how you express them. You could be really angry and grinning, oh, how interesting. That's wonderful.
Yeah, because someone could be saying things to you and hurting you and like twisting and screwing it, And it's like, okay, but I guess if you're just like, you know, you see it as like the divine game almost, like it's just like wiping out more crap. That person is just eliminating your crap by doing the wrong thing on you. So it's like, okay, go ahead.
Well, the story is that when Eric first went to live among the men, fondly with Baba, he was young and literal. And Baba was trying to be honest in all circumstances. He was living with men who were considerably older than he was. And Eric would call them on their stuff, if they weren't being literal. This peeved a lot of people, significantly, with Eric. And of course, Baba knew what was going on, and they complained to Baba about this young guy who was upsetting the balance by his brutal honesty. And so Baba had a talk with Eric in the hall, in which essentially he talked about the difference between honesty and truth. And he said, Eric said, Baba, she said, I should always tell the truth. He says, yes, you should always tell the truth. But you can be honest and not hurt the heart of another. You should never hurt the heart of another. So it was Baba's way of giving a teaching lesson to Eric that he didn't share with us when we came along.
But Eric expressed his anger very well. Once he yelled at me, God said, oh,
Eric once yelled at you?
yeah, get out of here, don't, something.
We are very fortunate.
Yeah, he was several times, you know, but I just like him even more because he expressed his human side.
You like that coarser grade of sandpaper?
Yeah, we are not in a beige stage, so if we will not express any feeling, it's just boring to death. Something has to be, you know, balanced.
There was a story about Papa Jesuala having an enormous blowout with somebody over something, and then Baba gave him a lecture after that blowout about forgiveness, in which he said that forgiveness means you don't even remember the thing that you've forgiven.
Forgive and forget.
Yeah. You don't even remember.
The thing with anger, at least for me, it's not to justify it and not to believe it. Not to believe the storyline that comes along when you're angry. So you express what you're feeling, but you're not convinced that that person really is this horrible thing or did this awful thing, and you just let the feeling go. It's easy to let it go.
There's a cartoon character named Ziggy. It's a one-frame cartoon that shows us an ambush. Who encounters different situations. Besides the one of him walking along and he sees a sign that says, "The world as you have known it has never existed." Another one of Ziggy's up on the mountaintop of the yogi who tells him, "The secret of happiness, Ziggy, lies in not taking your own life personally." It's quite profound.
Yeah.
Do they have it anthologized in a book?
They must.
Yeah.
Go online and it's got to be.
They're great. It sounds good.
Zen and the Art of Comics.
There's a story that Erich, I think, told Bob Gans, and I later saw it in a Ramakrishna tale, about a fellow who's in a boat, and there's another boat coming towards him, and at first he like waves towards the guy, but then the boat is heading straight towards his boat,
Right.
and he's starting to wave him off, and
Right.
he's starting, "What are you, crazy? Get out of the way, you're gonna hit us both!" And he gets a look, and he sees that there's no one driving the boat. And like I've seen it used two ways. One, that when you're angry, there's no one driving the boat. And then the other, that you're angry about situations that have no cause. It doesn't help you being angry. There's no one in the boat.
I wanted to ask you guys a question from last night's meeting. That when you both were in the herbs and potion and elixir experience mode at one point in time, and then you got the message from Baba to stop and then go back and tell others that it's not healthy, sensible, and reasonable. And I wonder what was the experience like to go back to the people who you had been involved with it, as opposed to like talking to people who, you were doing your talk. But what about with people who knew you then?
Good question. Who was the people that?
Well, I guess Leary and Albert and all your colleagues.
Yeah, well, let's say, certainly the champions of the psychedelic movement were not happy with us. They were partially receptive, but they weren't pleased. Some others were kind of tolerant, kind of the old, well, whatever your trip is, man, that's okay. If you're not doing it anymore. But I think we did a reasonably soft sell on the news. Can you gently introduce some of our old friends that was not going to be helpful? And a lot of them were coming to that same conclusion. I'd say 50% of the people at Millbrook knew that that was correct. They were not going to be able to do it by drugs. Robert?
I think it was difficult in many ways, because there were a lot of people that I'd known for a long time. We used to get stoned together. And I came back from India making this journey, and I wasn't getting high enough. And I told them why, and some people rejected the only basis of friendship was getting high, whereas others who were more thoughtful, some people in particular, who were really looking for a reason not to come out. And when I told them about Bob and my drugs, they had a reason not to get high anymore. So it was a mixed bag. And the people who were left behind because I wasn't doing dope anymore. So it was just a question of gradual estrangement anyways. So it was challenging.
I have a question. How much in the readings that I'm doing about Baba that he kept such control over everything, about what people said, how they did it. Did he do that with you, with the three of you? How much freedom were you given to use your own words, and how much did Baba feed you or restrict you, or how much monitoring of that was done?
We had the statements that Baba had made about drugs.
You had what?
We had the statements that Baba had made, word for word, from correspondence from...
About drugs,
About
how
drugs,
he wanted
yeah.
it said.
So we had Baba's own words, and how we conveyed them was essentially left to us. And that's how a lot of how things evolved over time, in different contexts. What we found out as we went ahead, doing talks in universities, on radio shows, TV shows, church groups, whoever would listen. There's a lot of flexibility in how we presented it. Over time we learned ways and skills of how best to convey what we were trying to, depending on the nature of the audience.
Principles were there, but the expression was up to us.
You were in a lot of debate type situations with proponents of psychedelic usage. And I suppose to some people in the audience, the kind of, happiness and bubbliness that you usually go around with, that made its own point. But I suppose that others challenged you and asked you, how do you really know that the authority on which you're basing, your contention that drugs are harmful spiritually and mentally and physically is a true authority? And how did you answer those kinds of challenges?
There we had a big advantage. Because we had done it ourselves. Now, had we not, I don't know how it would have gone, not very well. The other thing is, I think, as I recall Robert's experiences incorrectly, we pretty much had good experiences, primarily, and many of them very spiritual. So we were not in a position of having to deny the subjective apparent effect.
Okay.
We were in the position of one-upping it, saying, hey, well, of course, this was a later one.
This is an even better high.
This is a better high.
Right.
Or if you think that's what's happening, you're dreaming that. And that they couldn't quite deal with because they didn't have that experience. Now, there were some effective counters like, why should you put your chip on us?
Yeah.
And you had to be careful about not being authoritarian about it. Well, you should
I
stop
said so.
because God said not to do it.
Yeah.
Being parental wouldn't work.
Right.
Being parental. So, and you can be real sneaky by saying, I don't care what you're saying. You know intuitively what I'm saying. And on some level they did.
Of course.
On some level they did.
Why is that sneaky?
Well, it's sneaky because it's definitely sneaky. Well, because it puts somebody in a very difficult position. It's like the psychotherapist who said, I think your problem is anger. No, doctor. Yeah, it's anger. No, it isn't. I'm going to know it. There you go. Yeah, the hell it is. You idiot! My brother was not it, you stupid fool. The therapist says, I'll take my point. It's sneaky in that way, but it was also true. And, I think we didn't, it wasn't that the debates were scored exactly. And even in those days, although I think Rick exaggerated a little in that 30 or 40 would be pulled in on any given night. I think that would have been a major haul. We were happy with 1 or 2.
Yeah.
And there'd usually be at least 1 or 2 people come up afterwards saying, I think that's right. I'm interested, or
Made sense.
How do I find out more?
Yeah.
And then what did you do? Direct them to a local group, or?
well, it depends on what phase it was in. Whether it was the mostly anti-drug phase or mostly pro-Mayor Baba phase. That's why I think we had a little pamphlet, God in the Pill. We had Rick had been working on, I think it's still alive on some little box 1101.
Yes.
So there was a place to get cards and a place to get literature, so that they could
And also
follow.
Kitty was selling the books, and
Kitty was selling
Henry
the
DeShadi was selling the books. So the Raptors is good people.
And very often, unless it was in Berkeley, we'd have local hosts who we could connect people up with. But then there were times that Robert had just come back from Hawaii. There were times where if Baba needed to get somebody in his net, he would take you out of the ordinary sphere of talking or formal inquiries. And we were reminiscing a little bit. The previous head who passed away a couple of years ago of the Hawaii group was named Stan Olapa.
They tell them stories.
Brief, this could be a long story, I'll make it brief. We were coming back from India in 1969, and as some of you know, Baba had encouraged people once they visited his samadhi to go directly home.
Right.
3 of us, 2 women and I, were tired and happened to ask Bush to do whether it would be okay to stop off in Hawaii. We didn't expect that she would approve. and it was an unusual request, and she approved it immediately. So, dead tired, I took the ladies to a hotel we had booked, and I was so relieved. We checked in, it was like midnight, and I couldn't wait to get to bed. I told Susan, well, good night, Jean, good night, Susan. And then Susan, who, as a matter of fact, lives in Philadelphia now, and will be moving to Myrtle Beach and I think India later. Susan says, well, let's go out and get a drink. And I think, what? We have just come back from the holiest site in 1969 of the Great Darshan. 2, we were on marginal ground anyway here because of our tiredness. And 3, it's frigging 12:30 in the morning. You know, you're crazy. Fortunately, the other woman with us was this very innocent, almost nun-like girl. And so it was an easy sell. I said, Jean, really, right? I mean, we can't do that. She suddenly goes, well, no, that's okay, I'll go. What? So for 10 minutes I tried to convince them, and Susan would not stop. So I was going to say, all right, go ahead. I said, I can't. This is the Honolulu, it's not a great area. All right, I'll go with you, but let's make it fast. So we're walking down the street and pass a number of bars, and the girls look in the bars, and they say, ugh, I don't want to go in there. This is a bar. This is where you get a drink. That's why I was suggesting we didn't go. One after another after another. Then it starts to rain. I said, that's it. I'm putting my foot down. The next place that serves liquor, we're going there. That's it. I said, all right, okay. The next place is this local bar and club. I think the Boar in the Bull or something like that. Really sleazy place. Smoke-filled. Obviously, there's locals. We get a lot of stares as we walk down.
Oh no.
And it had a 2-drink cover charge.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so
2 drinks.
2 drinks. Yeah, you had to have at least 2. And so we sat down, and I'm fatigued, I'm grumpy, I'm miserable. I said, all right, let's order something and drink up. And they had a band there, a bad band. The smoke was running. And then there was these 2 really rough-looking tattooed guys at a nearby table, staring over at the girls. And I'm only one guy, so there was a signal that somebody's available. And I said, don't look back at them. Susan would not obey. She was a curious woman. And so Ben says, and son of a gun, if the big, toughest looking guy didn't walk over to the table and ask me to dance, I'm going to She said, sure. Mercy the Deuce is going to kill me, Baba's going to kill me. What if I have allowed this terrible thing to happen? And I grabbed Jeannie and I said, okay, we got to dance, so let's stick right next to him in case there's a kidnapping or something. So they came back and then they said, do you mind if we join you? The girls. And they said, sure, fine, come on over. They're getting a little drunk. And so the 2 guys are sitting at the table. And I don't see a way out of this. I'm keep looking at my watch. Oh, we're on India time. It's at least 5 in the morning, guys. And then the guy says, well, you don't seem to be from Hawaii. Why are you here? And I begin saying, don't tell them. And of course they didn't pay any attention to me. Oh, we're back from a pilgrimage from India. Really? Yeah, we went to Mayor Baba's darshan. I mean, oh jeez, no, it's too much. And the big guy seemed very interested. And I said, really, tell me a little bit more about that. And so she did. And I said, look, we really have to go. And I said, well, you know, I've been running the Shivananda meditation group here in Honolulu for a while. What did he say? He was very interested. Let me show you around the island tomorrow. I'm going to meet. And of course they said yes. And to make a long story short, to the best of my resistance, that was arranged, and it turned out that this was Stan Awapa, who had his own nightclub at that time, and another former guy who was, they were in the families of Hawaii. They were on the edge of the law, I would say, but just were taken by hearing about Baba. And by the time we left Honolulu, they were on a plane to India.
Wow.
To get the rest of the darshan.
Wow.
They came back with all kinds of relics and treasures. They had Baba's chair, they had sadras, they had sandals, they had everything. And Stanley started then a Baba group in Honolulu, surprisingly, most of his friends. In fact, the first Baba meeting was at the Lemon Tree nightclub in the back room. And he got in touch with Marisha Deuce, and she said, one more there, and then you really have to find a more suitable place. And that was in 1969, and that group, although small, kept up for a long time, and it's still going.
He was just there.
Yeah.
He was just there.
And I could add.
Did you go to Molokai?
I can add one thing to your story.
Yes.
That Stan's wife, Shirley, told me. And that is that Stan was attracted not to the girls, but to the aura that the three of you were emanating.
That's right. Thank you for it.
And he was just so struck by how high the three of you seemed to be in a spiritual sense. He was a little bit psychic. That's what drove him to come over and talk to the three of you.
And so
What did his tattoos say?
No.
He's native Hawaiian?
Yes.
How'd you find the meeting?
Wonderful. Rather wonderful.
He's dead now.
Yeah. How many, what island?
Well, there was a Shahabas on Maui, but Stan was creating a Baba Center on Malacca, and his wife Shirley is continuing that process. They have
Wonderful.
something 5 to 10 acres of land there that they're building.
It's a little baby Myrtle Beach, right?
Baby Myrtle Beach. Yeah.
How many people in the Hawaii group there?
Oh, it was about, I don't know. They're very, they're like New Yorkers, you know. They don't get together too frequently or too often. They all do their own thing. So it was maybe 10, 12. I'm not sure.
Bill and Peggy Stevens are out there.
Bill and Peggy Stevens happening. And probably if Robert reported on something. If you went into the woodwork, probably 25. But true regulars are a relative handful.
But it does seem like that's going to be
I think it will be.
a coming place for the Baba.
I think it's going to be coming place because it has, it has several of the characteristics of. If you remember Baba's laundry list of a center in the United States.
Virgin Lake by the ocean.
Right. All of those. That this property in Molokai meets most of those that criteria.
There's fresh water.
There's fresh water there.
Moderate climate over there, right?
There's what?
Moderate climate over there?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
And how do they receive people now? Do you camp, or do they have
No,
bungalows?
they have one very, very nice full bungalow with full kitchen, cable TV,
Cable TV, no
Cable
less.
TV.
or satellite TV.
Did you stay there?
Shocking.
You stayed there? Nice,
No, we didn't, I didn't stay there, we only
It's,
visited for the day.
very nice bedroom, library, meditation room,
Keep going.
full,
Is it,
full bath, and there's a Hawaiian
I'm going.
physician practitioner who's kind of naturalistic alternatives guy who's quite interested about who's very close to the family. I didn't meet him there, but apparently he's a very interesting person. And you can, I mean, it's really at the very beginning, which is fun to watch. You can rent bikes, and it's about 3 miles to town. Molokai is very small, 6,000 regular people, but they have an espresso cafe. They have cowboys, and they have cattle ranches, and the leper colony, of course, which is very interesting. And so Stan really put a huge amount of energy into planning that, and
fantastic
have
story.
the property, and they're working hard to build it as a pilgrimage retreat place for Babalos. They also, I think it won't be terribly expensive, but you're supposed to work a couple of hours a day if you can.
Nice.
Wonderful. And it's on Molokai.
is it true what I heard, that there's no sex allowed on the center, but there's alcohol is permitted?
It was modeled very close to Myrtle Beach. I think probably the cabins, it's requested they be alcohol-free. But there's a cottage where Shirley lives that's kind of off campus. Not that it's a heavy drinking place, mind you.
Well, in Myrtle Beach, there used to be alcohol, and Elizabeth used to say, put your wine bottles in, make sure they're not showing above the lid of the trash can because the neighbors will talk. This is in the early 60s. Yeah.
Interesting.
People used to bring their
Hey, we
wine.
missed that one. We missed that one.
Well, I think it's like Myrtle Beach in the sense that in Elizabeth's house and in Jane's house and in Lynn Ott's house, liquor was allowed. In Molokai, in Shirley's house where she lives there,
Right.
liquor's allowed.
Stan,
It's not by any means a
no.
big,
This is not a theological thing. The inheritance of the islands and of the activities in the Bao people, or the pre-Bao people, is pretty wild. So he really wanted a contrast to that people would really feel safe and not, especially as the place grew, wouldn't have the pressure of the ordinary risk behaviors.
There are now Baba people on Oahu, Maui, Molokai, and Hawaii, they're living there.
How long does it take to get from one place to the other?
And if you go by boat, a couple of hours, flights,
from Maui to Molokai is 1 hour by boat. And you can do it by helicopter in 15 miles.
I've never been to Molokai. Let's do it.
Could we kind of rewind the tape and...
Rewind, no, we only unwind. No.
Yeah, let's unwind the tape, and the question I have is the transition period between Baba's physical presence with the mandolin. I know you weren't really there that much for the transition period, but what is your sense of how they underwent that transition from being completely focused on Baba for every direction to kind of assuming some of the directing authority themselves, still of course asking Baba for guidance, but having to, in some dimension, make it up as they go along.
I can think immediately of a story that Monty told. I mean, they missed Baba desperately. His physical contact, his silence, they missed his silence.
Wow.
And Baba didn't tell them what to do. They didn't know whether or not to stay in Meherabad, if they were to go back to their homes, their family homes. There was no direction. And they were in mourning. Mera was in serious mourning for a very long time. And there was confusion about what to do next. And Erich was very instrumental in helping keep things cohesive and in sorting out what was going on and sort of staging it, developing what came next. And one evening, one night, while this was going on, Erich called Monty over and he pointed out into the field and said, "What do you see?" And it was dark and she couldn't really see anything. They could hear sheep. He said, "You see that lump over there?" She thought it was a little hill. And he said, "That's the shepherd." He said, "Oh, you can't see him. He's always looking out for the flock." So in the same way, Baba was always looking out for his flock. That very much impressed Monty. When Baba had left his direction in terms of the trust, how that would be developed, but very little else. And slowly but surely, they began to come to terms with Baba's absence. First, Westerners started showing up, and all of them was there for the interment. Rick and the Luck brothers. And they realized they had a developing responsibility to communicate what Baba had conveyed to them and share it with gems about Baba put it. Gems would be coming. So that's really the sort of the nascent beginning of how things started to develop.
And it was one big help when Rick and I were there maybe a couple of days after.
This is for the interment?
Yeah. There was kind of a meeting, informal gathering out on the patio outside what is now the museum building. And I remember Monty saying, and everybody's really tired of this, well, now that the interment's over, I guess we should start communicating to the West and tell them that the darshan's canceled. And everybody said, yeah. The other lot of us said, yeah, who's going to do that, etc. But then, it had been that the days before, just after Baba dropped the body, where were you at? Were you in town or were you in
When
Asia?
Baba dropped the body,
Yeah.
in the hospital, and he called me into
A group got together to look back in the family letters and Baba's messages and pull out the stuff that seemed to predict that he would be leaving. You heard last night from one of the telegrams, my time is fast approaching. When we went back, we saw all kinds of things. My work is done, and some real knockout ones, which is, would you mind? He said to the Mandali, do you think people would mind if I did the darshan reclining? Because they were very worried about his health, and they said, well, no, Baba, they wouldn't mind if you could do it. He said, well, that's how I'm going to do it. So we tentatively started to say, you know, there were some things that Baba said about this. And then everybody started remembering. And I said, within a half hour, Molly said, we have to go ahead with the darshan. And once that decision was made, they then had to mobilize them, they had something to do. And it kept them busy for 5 months, 6 months. And I think that raised both their confidence that they could carry on, that they could manage large things, that Baba would give them guidance. By that time, Mara was recovered from her mourning at some level and was also able to be really opened herself up much more to contact with folks in pilgrimage, and they were so used to working hard and serving that once that started rolling,
Right.
they found a lot of other things that Baba were going to be necessary to sustain, at the very least, the influx of visitors. And I think that period helped.
Also, with that great darshan, preparing for that, and then the transition was, about transitions, seeing Baba, from their perspective, one in the many, from one in the many to many in the one, okay? And if we could just elaborate what that means, one in the many to many in the one, okay? And I don't remember that analogy. Can you help with that?
Love the one in the many, not the many in the one. Isn't that right? Love the one.
Mani said in that film,
Yeah.
Eternal Beloved, that when Baba was in the body, they saw the many in the one. They were focused only on Baba. They only looked at him. And then when Baba dropped the body and all the crowd started to come, then they saw the one in the many. That in their eyes, in their longing, they experienced Baba's divinity, which is also what Erich said, that he had to care for Baba's frail body and sometimes became so exasperated that people were coming for a day or a few hours and would glory in Baba's divinity. And so one day he brought it up to Baba, and Baba said, yes, that's in your destiny to care for my physical body. It's not in your destiny to experience my divinity now. But after I drop my body, when people come, through them you'll experience it.
Right, so they're experiencing Baba's divinity through the one and the many.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
And it also, in 69 Darshan, how many were there? 35 years ago already. It was an incredible time for everyone. The Mandali particularly were energized, enlivened, joyously greeting these crowds of people, most of whom did not meet Baba in the physical body. And they were amazed that all these young people were coming from Australia, from the States, from the West Coast, from Myrtle Beach, all these different flights, people arriving between March and June. Some people came overland. They were blown away by it. And remember when Baba had said that in December '68, when he had given the thread ceremony to some of the Parsi children and the marriage of Amrit and Dara, he told them to just wait, point to his ring finger. So my gems will be. And that's really what, once that took place, it gave them a focus and an energy to be there, to be in Mandali Hall. I mean, it was open 6 days a week. And they would share all day long. I saw a photo of Bendu sitting there with a sign behind them saying, everyone's supposed to leave by 6 p.m. Now you go at 11:30 and you're back in Maribor by 1, 2 days a week. But it was an exciting, very rich time.
They were seeing the fruition of something
Exactly.
that they hadn't even.
Yeah.
Wasn't it? I forgot which Mandali it was who said when Baba had fallen gravely ill, maybe now we should close up shop. And he said, "What do you mean? The shop is about to open."
That was Padre.
Yeah.
was Padre who also said about the crates and the lachesis, the snakes. It was the crate, he said, 15 minutes to write your will. Then the ticker starts to go. 30 minutes, you're gone.
Were there many crates there?
No. I never saw them. And, there's all kinds of, I think of armor key thieves. And, which if you haven't been to one, it's well worth going, and I really feel it's Bob's Majesty. There was, the first armor key thief that I went to was in '79. And some people and I flew over from San Francisco, arriving the morning, the first day of armor key thief. And greeting everyone and being greeted, it was marvelous. And hordes arriving by bus from all over India, and trains, and long dusty walk up the hill, waiting in line to go over to Darshan, 4 or 5 hours in the line, snaked all the way down the railway tracks, people singing Baba's name. It's phenomenal. And Erich's custom was to stay awake for the entire time, for the 3 days. Just as he did during the internment, for the 7 days he never slept. So he took that practice into the Amatithis and never slept. And I decided, with some others, that going to accompany him, stay awake for the entire time. And what would happen is during the day there would be all the programs and skits and songs and the ongoing endless darshan line, which was Samadhi's open 24 hours a day. And then at night, when most normal people would go back to the tents and go to sleep, a few of us would sit up with Erich. Erich would sit on the wall outside of perimeter of Baba's cabin and tell stories all night long. It would get quite cold. So I just had to stay up with him for those few days. And at the end of my 3rd night without sleep, I looked at Erich and I said, what kind of vacation have I had? I said, I didn't sleep coming here. I've been up for 3 nights with you now. What kind of vacation is this? And he said, oh, Robert, it's a vacation from sleep.
I had an unusual experience when I first went to Baba Samadhi. I originally had a ticket to go to the last darshan, and I had purchased a ticket, but then my parents had threatened to have me arrested, and I found something in the circular. I went on a 3-day hunger strike to try to convince them to let me go. But I found something where Baba said if it caused family disharmony not to come, and he would benefit equally, so I finally opted for that option. But when I finally went in '74, I rushed up to Samadhi, and Baba said to me, what are you doing here? I am not buried here. You will never find me in this tomb. And I thought, well, this is jet lag, I really, for some reason, I didn't want to hear that. So I came back the next day hoping to hear something different, and it was the same exact message, except a little bit different, but he said, I am buried in the hearts of others. That is the only tomb I have. In your own heart, you'll never find me here. And I don't know why, to this day, he kept repeating that to me. Because I consciously, I never had the concept that he was buried there, or that he was a physical form. But for some reason, he kept declaring that to me. And it's very reminiscent of the kind of thing he said to Rick and many others. Having seen me with your physical eyes, you've seen me not at all. I want you to see me as I really am. For me, he kept saying, you'll never find me in this tomb. I'm in your hearts. But it was a little bit, it was disappointing in a way at the time, because, how Bob had expressed that second only to meeting him, the significance of coming to his samadhi. And I didn't get any kind of feeling of a pat in the back, or I'm glad you come, but it was almost like, you should know better than have come here. What are you wasting your time here almost? It was almost on that level. It was like, you'll never find me. It was an odd kind of thing.
Have you been back since? Have you
Yes,
been-
I did go back 18 years later once. But I think it's one of the reasons why I didn't go frequently was because it was experienced as somewhat of a kind of a quasi-rebuke. Although now, years later, I feel it was a real gift that he gave me. But it took me many years to absorb it and to realize that it was an important gift. At the time, I thought it was a kind of slap in the face.
And didn't Bob always kind of underline, even to the Mondley, that I am not this body, and, you know, even in his last days, he said that over and over. So,
But it does not in any way diminish the importance of the samadhi. It's still the focal point of extraordinary energy and dynamic love comes. But I think any opportunity to go to the samadhi should be taken without hesitation. I mean, you're quite right. I mean, Adi said second only to being there is the longing to be there. To increase the longing. I mean, but they have, you know, different strokes for different folks. I go every year because I need it. I need to recharge my batteries. But, you know, I guess we all do what we can and we're able to.
But Baba is there. I felt Baba there in Samadhi. He talked after he answered. He was there. What? Baba. He is there.
He's everywhere.
He's there and in Samadhi as well.
and who you are.
In this,
It's all good.
I read a story that reminds me that in my first year with Baba, I spent a lot of time around Harry Kenmore, and so much of Baba came pouring through him in his talks, and I was there when he died. And I went to the funeral, and it was a bit of a shock. I kind of didn't think that Kenmore was going to die. But just, I mean, I knew he was deathly ill. But I went up to the coffin where he was laying down, and I just looked at him, and he went, which he used to do. He had this sort of a snort. And I went, and I don't usually tell this story, but because it's a little unusual, but then he lifted his head, he looked at me, turned his head, and went back down again. And it wasn't frightening, it wasn't unusual or anything. I mean, I knew he was still dead, but the message was really clear. Like, it was, the way I got it was like, didn't you get what I was telling you? This is not real. And years later, Zeke and I were at Bernice Ivory's funeral. And I was telling some story about Bernice's spurring me and my daughter's mother, my ex-wife, before we had a child, to have her, to get moving. And we both glanced over, and we saw Bernice smiling. And it was really clear. And it's like, you know, it's not limited to the body, but it's also there.
But Nashirvan told that Baba opened his eyes. He was in Baba's Samadhi the first night, Nashirvan. He never told the story, but he told us last Saturday, and he came down to Baba, you know, downstairs, and he looked at Baba and he said, Baba, what are you going to do without you? Baba. And he saw, put the flashlight, and he saw Baba open his eyes. And after he turned, and Baba closed his eyes, and Nashirvan that moment realized that Baba is here, but Baba does not die.
But actually that segues into another story. Having to do with Harry Kenmore. When I first got back from India, I was coming to New York to stay with the Winterfelds. And Harry wanted to meet me. He heard that this young guy had gone to India and seen his pop. So he invited me to join him at his steakhouse, the Keen's Chop House.
Yes.
And he was
You stayed there.
Did you? Yeah. That was his club. They had the mugs, the beer steins with the names.
The pipes and stuff.
Right.
Like 20,000 famous people down there.
Yeah. And so he was a regular there. So we're sitting having dinner, and he wants to know my story. I'm telling him. And then, of course, he was mostly deaf and he was completely blind. He said, in the middle, he spoke loudly. He says, Mine's I feel your face. I said, no, Harry, go ahead. He says, what the hell is that? I had a few weeks of beard. And shaved. He said, why do you have that hair in your face? So I told him that when I'd been going overland to Baba, that I'd only been shaving with cold water and I'd stopped as soon as I was shaving for the camels, and that Baba said it was okay. So if my pop says it's okay, then it's okay. I still don't like it, but it's all right. So after dinner, we went out. It's winter in New York. It's cold as dickens. He says, get a cab, Robert. Flag down a cab. We'll get in the cab. Harry gives his address. And he says, driver, I want you to say something for me. I said, well, what, sir? He said, I want you to say Mayor Baba. I said, huh? What the hell, are you deaf? I'm deaf. I need you to say it loudly. Mayor Baba. I can't hear you. Mayor Baba. Not louder still. Mayor Baba. Okay, that's good. Keep saying it. And he and I are driving to the streets of New York with the cab driver shouting Baba's name.
What were you thinking, Robert?
I was just along for the ride. Michigan's beyond my ability to consider.
I want to ask you guys a question about Richard Alpert. He, in his book, Be Here Now, he had said that after he had written to Mayor Baba wrote back to him telling him he could use actually 3 more times.
That's right.
And Richard Alpert in the book says that he used it a fourth time, and that was out of the trip. That's the way he described it. And I was wondering if he ever, when you talked to it afterwards, if he ever elaborated on that.
Not to me. I did see him sometime in the late 60s in Berkeley. We got together and talking about Baba. And in the middle of the talking, he looks at me and says, you want a joint? I said, which? I said, no. Baba said not to take drugs. And I said, I need to follow his orders. He said, for me, I have a hard time following anybody else's orders. I said, well, following provides direction. He got very upset. And, one of the last times I saw him.
I've spoken to Ramdas a number of times about Mayor Baba, not since his stroke, but before that. And he had a number of interesting things to say, one of which was the fact that at one point Mayor Baba sent a cable to Nin Karoli Baba, Ramdas's guru, and said, send my love to your master. And another time, Nin Karoli said to Ramdas, I'm not really your master, I'm just your guru. Mayor Baba is your real master.
That's right.
But the latest take I got from him was that he considers Mayor Baba, and I don't know if this how he said, this is a few years ago, one of the masters that was guiding his unfoldments. But he said, as far as the astral soap opera stuff, this is the term he used about Mayor Baba being the avatar. He said he couldn't deal with that. He didn't know what to make of that, and he just wasn't interested in any of that. In other words, he considered Mayor Baba a master or a saint, but could not reckon with Mayor Baba's uniqueness as the avatar, and refused to pay attention to it. It was essentially what I got from him. He just was not. He was sort of almost repudiating it. Just didn't think it had. I don't know. It's hard to read it exactly, but he just wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. Baba's claiming to be the highest, the high, and the avatar was something that Ramdas just could not deal with. At least last I spoke to him, maybe 10 years ago. He called it astral soap opera stuff, which was I thought it was a little deprecating, to say the least. But that was his term.
The seed was planted.
Yeah.
And Baba always, Baba always considered that outward on some lovable one, and I think we call him Richie. Nobody calls him Richie. Rich is mine. I was obviously using it. And I still think, what was that new DVD?
Fierce Grace.
Fierce Grace.
Yes.
I mean, there's no doubt, I think, that this has contributed to the
Unfoldment.
yeah, to the very positive societal force. And I don't think he's taking a lot of acid right now.
No.
And it seemed from those communications that Baba was perfectly happy that me and Caroli would have Dreyfus as personal master.
Yeah.
That was fine. He was authentic. He was in the hierarchy.
He's clearly some kind of saint or something.
Yeah.
But I always got the feeling that Ram Dass loved Baba. And I remember at one of the lectures I happened to just give her, that thing, the game, the only real significance is to penetrate into the essence of all. And I just gave it to him, and just as just something to give him. And he just began his entire lecture with that, and spent about 45 minutes talking about what that meant and about Mayor Baba. And I always got the feeling he had deep reverence for Baba, but he just cannot reckon with Baba's uniqueness, as a lot of people have problems with, because those of us who accept it, it becomes almost second nature for us. But it's an amazing claim Baba makes, that he was the same soul as Muhammad and Jesus and Buddha and Krishna and Abraham, Zoroaster. And a lot of people, especially other people who've had contact with great saints like he did in Karoli, it's hard to understand the distinction between someone like Neem Karoli and why would Meher Baba be of such a greater order than that. It's understandable that unless you really had tremendous spiritual discernment, how could you know that? Or Baba wanted you to know it. So I think it's important not to be too down on him. But a lot of people who are not Baba lovers see him as more of a saint, or something like that. They don't really take Baba's avatarhood seriously.
Yeah, well, I'm not down on him. I first heard Meher Baba's name through him.
Yeah.
He was not my contact, but that was when I first heard the name. And I believe that I think he originally went to India with the idea of seeing Meher Baba. It was that when Meher Baba wouldn't see him, that he ended up on the trip that took him to New Karoli. But so I think he's definitely Baba's, and I think that connection is there, and I think it's still unfolding. I'm not even sure that the issue is that he couldn't deal with Baba's divinity. Maybe he just felt like he failed Baba on that fourth trip. That's why I asked that question. I was always curious about what happened on that fourth trip. But he's done a lot of good in different ways. It's interesting in that Divine Grace DVD that he talks about the fact that when he had the stroke, if it was a test, I failed.
Right.
He was not ready for it, and he's still in the process of learning. He's still in the process as we go along.
Bob, I want to understand something. You said that you were 22 years old when you embarked upon the overland trip. So, because you were 22, this is a question. It's not a set. Here's my point. Because you were 22, you didn't need your parents' permission.
Yeah.
Huh?
Is that a question or a statement?
Yeah. That's how I rationalize it. Because you were 22, you didn't need your parents' permission. Is that the way it was?
Well, I just did what I needed to do. And I just told them and sent the postcards. And this was a journey that I had to take. I had already, they were a little used to me by then. I'd already I had done a lot of hitchhiking prior to that trip. Across Mexico, across the States, across Europe. So they knew that I difficult to pin down and itchy feet. So, I mean, it wasn't necessarily approval, but there was acceptance.
Did your parents accept your craziness and this Baba? They accept this?
Well, I'll tell you a little. When I got back from India, back to my parents' home to visit, I was sitting down at the kitchen table with my mother, my father, and my sister. And I tried to share with them that Messiah. Told them about Baba. My father's comment, what does he do for a living?
Yes.
Ego elimination.
Turns liabilities into assets.
Did your parents come to decide Baba did have a job?
My mother was kind of tasting it just before she died. But they never became both Baba lovers. I always took heart in Baba's statement that your family for 7 generations was blessed. And those who come in like to me in their hearts. I mean, they got one way or another.
For 7 generations?
Yeah.
Which way up or down?
Both?
Yeah. When
Second
I,
up and second down?
That's what I understand.
Or 3.5 up and 3.5 down?
Yeah, what?
However you want to look at it.
What about the other half?
when I
Well, you're
first
right in the middle.
when I first heard and recognized Baba, I saw it was a search of about 9 months that began the day he dropped his body. But when I actually saw his picture and recognized him immediately, and so I was telling everyone because he kind of filled me in on all the background and then said, here I am. And so I went home that day from Queens College, where this was, and my mother was in the kitchen washing dishes, and I said, you know, Christ, who you've been known to church for your whole life, he's been here for the last 75 years. And I was like 17 and a half, and she'd seen me go through a lot. She said, well, that's nice. And I thought, she just didn't get it. I'll tell her again later. It took a while.
Allan, the book that you wrote brought a lot of young people to Baba. What prompted you to write that book?
That was during the wild days. And what prompted me to write it is that in my own experience, I was such a dummy that it was months after I accepted Baba as the avatar before I thought he had any techniques.
That's when the first book, Enlightenment for Dummies.
Yes, Enlightenment for Dummies. I didn't necessarily give up the Gurdjieff work or seeing yogis, etc., because we were very technologically oriented. That is, how do you get from here to there? Higher consciousness. We had been, of course, trained that drugs would do it. Now, the importance of Baba was to suggest that there were other ways of getting there, and that, in fact, drugs weren't a particularly good way to get there. Well, so we discovered, we came across, particularly at Millbrook, we were visiting dignitaries who would come by with everything from Vedanta to hypnosis to Tao Te Ching to various forms of meditation, which were all techniques. And I hadn't done enough reading, or I didn't understand enough at that time to realize that you could do the Meher Baba method. I finally figured it out after a visit to California that you could do Meher Baba all by himself. And I thought that was an important principle that I thought a lot of the Western seekers and young people would easily miss. And I suggested that to Kitty in a little note with a set of ideas that this is important and somebody should write this up. I didn't hear back from her. And at the same time that the letter came back from Adi with Baba's response to Murshid Deuce's issue, which launched us formally onto the big Boston Baba Boy event. That letter also included a note saying that Kitty had sent that note and outline to Baba. And it was something that Baba was pleased to see these points, and he approves your writing the book for people who've heard of Baba for the first time on the subjects indicated in the outline. So it was a double shock that day. I was in total trauma. First, to think that we were going to go around publicly, which went against my, I know you can't believe it now, but there was a time I was relatively shy. Not exactly publicly confident. And then this, which, you know, I had wanted so that I could read it, not that I wanted to write it. So that paralleled, and the book took a long time because I interpreted a direct order from Baba was more important than what could be construed as a request or an inquiry granted. So it took me about 10 years to do that. But that's the genesis.
But what about Master of Consciousness? Where is where is this book?
Allan's on my case. I am hopefully working on a second edition. The first edition was cut in half by the publishers artfully. But there's been, I would say, up to 400% more material published after that time. And I was using a lot of quotes from Baba. It was before Lord Mayor, etc. The bibliography in that book is meager by today's standards. And some places don't even exist anymore where there was Baba activity. So that's hopefully in process. The book is fairly out of print, but I stashed some copies
Hurry up.
away. I'll call you. She has influence.
How do people access that stash?
Huh?
How do people access that stash?
Oh, they usually get desperate. They go through Amazon.com and there's still some around in the bookstores, secondhand bookstores. If they really get desperate, they find it.
Try eBay.
eBay, right. If they really get desperate, I can usually provide a copy.
Now, Robert, have you done any publishing?
Just a transcription of my story. I've written it out. It's been published in a couple of books, compilations of all what you did. I don't remember the titles, but it's the broad strokes of it.
Alan, when Mayor Robert first dropped his body, how did Mr. Ivy Deuce explain to her students the apparent lack of the breaking of the silence and what to expect from it? How is it understood, and how is it understood by the Sufis today?
A good question, I can say this, I don't remember exactly. It was not a pressing issue. There was, I think, enough mystery around Baba's breaking of silence at that time that you didn't know. The other thing is that one of the quotes that we found Suggested that there was a good possibility that Baba indeed had something else in mind. Let's see here. No, it's not. Yeah. The only incomparable, we found this one. The only incomparable miracle I will perform is when I speak. I am like a lion, but at the moment, a caged lion. Those who recognize me feel the strength of my power, but only in a small degree. When I speak, I will uncage myself, and then you will know my divine strength. So, there was a potential interpretation that he wasn't going to speak until he dropped his body.
What book is that?
Huh? What?
What book is that?
Yeah, but let me just say, let me tell you where,
The one you
let me
wrote?
tell you where it was from. 20.
What's the name of that book?
That's a master contract.
That is Mastery, okay.
14.
It's not in print anymore, right?
Where were you? We just talked
But you persist.
I'm sorry.
We had a long discussion
You
on
guys.
it. You missed it.
Oh, God.
All right, that was
It was only
from
out for 2 minutes.
volume 3, number 4, 1956 of The Awakener. That's where that quote came from. So there was enough possibility that he wasn't dependent upon his body to speak, that it wasn't an issue that required explaining. It wasn't a crisis. Oh my God, he's died. He didn't speak. He didn't break the silence. There was that concern among Bible lovers, certainly after that, but I don't think it manifested much in San Francisco.
But do you still anticipate this pregnancy?
Well, now you've got a whole other.
What, the uncaging of the lion? Hell yes. Don't you think so?
I do.
Yeah. How could you not?
What about when he said Yad Ra Tabao? Remember?
When you said what?
Historically, it should be very interesting. I would like to hear Robert's take on it.
This is not as known as deflection.
That's right, it's deflection.
I have a question. And the
Should let us out.
You're not gonna answer that?
If Tony's letting us out, it must be divine intervention.
Only if you let me.
Go ahead.
It was just about the drug messages that Baba gave. I remember that, if I remember correctly, he said that marijuana and psychedelics, LSD, would be found to have legitimate medical purposes when prescribed by a doctor, but the way they were being used was dangerous. Have you had any thoughts? And over the years, there's been some development of that. Pot is used for glaucoma, and I read something with LSD being used for some mental health issues.
Yes.
Any thoughts on that as those things develop?
Well, he made a statement to the president, that was true. He said LSD could be used for treatment of alcoholism. Now, that work had been going on in Canada even at that point. There was a lot of work with psychedelics and some mental health issues, some psychoses, and certainly with alcoholism. And you could, but that's really been, unfortunately, the whole hysteria about drugs has driven much of that research underground, if at all. And it may reemerge. But see, and Robert can speak here, the pharmaceutical companies have no interest because these are drugs basically in the public domain. You can't patent them. So even if they are useful, they're not going to be interested in doing trials. So it's going to take some researchers with a lot of passion who believe that it can be useful for something else to be able to do this and to be able to get permission.
Let's see what Robert has to say about the science break. Is it's my sense that it's a real hot potato issue in general in the Baba community that a lot of people don't want to deal with it.
When I first met Margaret Krask, my friend Ella was 65, 66. I asked her, being naive young Baba lover that I was, I said, Margaret, what do you think about Baba's breaking the silence? And she responded, silence, schmilence. Who cares as long as we have Baba? That's direct from Margaret Krask. But I remember the 1966, 67, Baba's birthday message to all was, be composed in the reality of my love, because all confusion and despair is your own shadow, which will vanish when I speak the word. Unfortunately, my confusion and despair has not vanished. So I'm assuming that I'm having broken a prayer.
And he also said everything I've done is been mere preparation for the breaking of my silence. Remember this. So he kept pointing that out as the central, backbone of his advent. That the stamp and the one miracle would be this release of this infinite love, this unprecedented love.
But isn't he breaking his silence through us, in our hearts?
Yes, but that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about a universal public breaking of silence. He's not talking about the personal breaking of silence, as far as I can see. And if you look at the statements that he made, it's not just a mere evolution. He's talking about something that's never happened before, and that will not happen again for billions of years. Something really unprecedented. And I have no reason to suspect that will not happen still. I feel that it must happen. In what way exactly, who knows?
Or it may have already. I think it's Baba left us all with our individual understanding. Yeah, and I think, my own is that, at least in part, is that we're really caught up in our concept of time, which I don't think bears any relation to the divine unfolding of things. And I think we may look back in 50 years and say, oh, gee, it was happening all along, or 30 years, whatever. I think our perception is so confined that it could be all around us and we're just not aware of it at the moment. And we're affected by it, and it moves, it shapes what's happening in the world, and yet we don't see it because our vision isn't refined. I'm not saying that's the truth. I'm saying that's...
But he did give us one window in 1954, during the 3 Incredible Weeks.
We're all right.
Where he said that in 70 years from now, the greatest people will gather at my samadhi and vie with each other as to who loves me more. And for that to happen in 20 years from now, something absolutely phenomenal will have to happen, soon. For, because in other places he talks about the greatest people as not just like the great saints, but celebrities. So in other words, that the conditions...
And yes, celebrities are ready.
Many of the questions, Bob, I was a little bit surprised that Baba kissed you, okay? And even when I see... Huh? No, this is what I mean. And even when I see in the film footage Baba kissing people, I'm surprised. The whole idea of kissing surprises me. When Baba kisses somebody, it shows that it's not superficial. Okay, I'm trying to understand this. Okay, all right. So I'm trying. Really. I like to say. I consider kissing as very superficial.
Why?
What?
I consider kissing to be very superficial.
In this culture?
Well, that's why I look at it. I'm trying to understand. Now, here Baba's kissing you. I'm trying to understand. Is Baba's? I see Baba kissing people in film footage. So, why is he kissing you?
And Baba,
Rather he
the wrong
punched you.
person to ask.
He should give me a
Ask
tight
Baba.
slap.
Yeah, he should have hit you right in the...
Yeah. So.
This is my point about Bob's silence breaking on our perceptions. though.
Yeah, it is, it
We're
is.
so,
Yeah,
we
you
all
see,
have our
I really do,
viewpoints.
because, yeah, I mean,
Why
so,
Baba kiss you?
No, but I heard that,
Well, if it wasn't for Parmesan's kiss, where would we all be?
Probably, you know, Baba was not
That was
kissing.
no superficial kiss.
So Baba it was not superficial at
That
least.
was a
Yeah.
good.
The original real.
Right.
And if you Papa did the kissy Obama, where would you be?
So, I mean, I think what one can safely say
yeah,
is that Baba had the ability to interpret how his affection would be received by the devotee. And there are some devotees, if you look at some of the films in India, they wouldn't get near him to hug him. It would be, they wouldn't even be capable of it. But they were in love with his feet. Right? Very, very different.
Right.
Someone would go by, they wouldn't even look at him. Did you notice that? They just,
yeah,
and it's not that their devotion
Right.
was any less. It's probably not even that their experience of that time was any less, but that was for them in that culture, for their personality and their sanskaras,
I see.
the way they could receive the love and affection, and symbology of affection that could be taken. There's some cultures, for example, where eye contact could not be made. Muslim women, for example, would not usually be able to do that.
Right.
And yet for Americans, they love to stare at Baba's eyes, right? But he knew that, and I think we can say confidently and be reinforced by Robert, that Robert felt that to be very natural.
I
And
see.
he liked it.
I see, so, okay,
May it happen again.
yeah, but
Did you
these-
like it?
Then,
Right, so it's a matter of being natural, Baba's being natural, and a natural show of affection. A natural show of
For
affection.
him.
I'm sure it varies, it varies.
For
him,
For
yes.
him.
I
Right,
bet he wouldn't have kissed you,
right, right.
because you would have taken it as superficial.
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
So he would know what you would
Right.
regard as the most powerful. It might be a touch, it might be a clump on
right,
the head.
that's right,
Oh,
you got it, yeah,
For example,
right.
I mean, Sean, anyone ever seen the film of East West Gathering? When Red Monday go by,
Yeah,
they bow down to Baba, and he slaps them on the shoulder.
Right,
They go
yeah.
by. That was the first time in 20 years that the men Monday were allowed to bow down to Baba. In 20 years.
At the East West Gathering?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it varies with your sanskaras.
Were either of you, or was that too early? When was the helplessness stage? I'm just reading Kitty's book and
The helpless and hopeless stage.
We
yeah.
like him.
What years were,
40.
that was before you all, right?
Yeah, that's the
That
early
was before
50s.
us.
Okay, so that was.
Way before.
I thought Baba said that would go on living forever, that phase. So it's not just limited to that period of time.
Thank God, if it depended on me.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
there's nobody to do it. That's a great quote.
So Baba just gives you the strength to keep telling your stories over and over. Thank you so much.
We have
for
nothing else to
sharing.
say.
Right.
Because you know, as I've watched the videos, and I've watched you two, and I watched the three of you last night, the message that I get so strong is that no way do any of you allow any of us to bow down to you as individuals because you got to be with Baba, but that you are just that way. And that's wonderful for me to see.
You know,
Yeah.
Baba says it increases when shared with others.
What?
It increases when shared with others.
Ooh.
Do you find that?
Oh, without question.
Yeah.
And
We are
really,
Baba boys, we all like it.
We're losing,
well, it's really,
we're losing the boys part of it.
we're losing
Yeah.
those, but maybe it'll come back.
But it was there last night.
Well, obviously, it's also meditation. In Baba's term of it's an act of meditation, and of course, one enjoys. You can't do anything that's more valuable than to focus your attention on the highest of the high. You get a chance to talk about it, it's fairly guaranteed. So, and particularly since, now I think we've become much more discreet in the more recent past, in the sense that you'll notice that we really don't proselytize that much in the Christian evangelical way.
Did we ever?
Yes, there was a period. The billboard period.
The devil standing outside, talks giving out flyers.
That's right.
It's really more informational. But, so the notion of conversion is refreshingly absent, because the notion of conversion is actually an oxymoron when it comes to Meher Baba's theology. It assumes a movement from who or what you are to someplace you are not. Baba's whole message is you got to forget who you are and become who you think you are and become who you really are. So, and he did say that the avataric path is for the very few. And we see why it's for the very few, because it doesn't give a lot of the ordinary spiritual rewards that people are used to. Happiness, there's no guarantee, right?
Peace of mind.
Peace of mind, there is no peace of mind on this path, unquote. If you want peace of mind, then you could go and get it in other ways. Listen to music, take walks, or go to gurus or sadhus. Take sedatives, but you will not get peace of mind on this path. So you don't get peace of mind. You don't get experiences. Remember the big fight between Baba and Kirpal Singh about that. You don't get experiences. You don't get wealth.
Or health.
Or health as a condition. Right? And you got to keep a little bit of a check on your emotions and your desires.
Lassie says, I'm not the one who gives, I'm the one who takes.
Don't come to me for anything, I'm going to take it.
I think the big difference is that Meher Baba gave us a mandate. He said, especially in the 60s, he said, now is the time to let all know that I'm God in form. But he never said that we had to convert others to that viewpoint, which apparently some, at least whether previous avatars did it, it was interpreted like in the time of Christ, that they had the mandate to go forth and to preach to glad tidings and to let others, to turn others into that form of belief. Whereas we don't have that mandate. We have the mandate just to share it, and then if the people take it or don't take it, that's it. You know, it's like, that's the difference.
Yeah, see, this is the first time in the role of the avatars in this cycle of time, I think, that the avatars ever described what the avatar is about. And you know, the full person in a spirit of who's never heard of Baba, or is more blessed than
It could be an atheist.